Okay, so we're going to look at assessment and feedback today, and this is a document, will be kind of a working document. So Helen, as you have any comments or anything that you want to give, feel free to either type them in the chat, or since I shared the document with you, you can also type directly into it as well. So feel free to, we'll add some things as we go through this. So the outcomes of what I would like to achieve today are that we can look at what is assessment, and then also what is not assessment, kind of look at what works and what doesn't. What is backwards design, and describing the characteristics of authentic assessment tools, looking at formative and summative assessments, what is good feedback, and then the value of using a rubric or a marking guide. I guess my intention when I created this session was more for new instructors, those that haven't really been exposed to some of the language of assessment. What exactly is assessment? What is feedback? What is a rubric? So hopefully our new instructors will be able to access this video and be able to kind of get some introduction to that. But it's also a good refresher for those that do have some experience, just to kind of get that reminder of what assessment should be. I have created a Google site that if you do go into the Google Sites, the Olds College Google Sites page, you will see the ETC department, all of the sites that we've created, and there is one called Assessment and Feedback. I've just basically built it as a resource site. There is a whole bunch of links to, and they're links to basically answer questions that you might have as an instructor. So it's a good place to start if you kind of have some questions, if you're looking for some good general resources. I've kind of weeded out some that I didn't think were as good. So this you can access through the Olds College sites. If you go to the 9 little squares and click on sites and then browse my sites, and then you should find this one. I've made it available to everybody in Olds College. So it's there, but you can also access it through the link in the PowerPoint if I have shared it with you. Okay, so what is assessment? Really what assessment is it goes beyond what grading is. It goes beyond just giving your students what their marks are. You're looking for what are the outcomes of what you want your student to do, and then your students then need to have opportunities to reach those outcomes. So you should be giving them a variety of opportunities to show you that they can do the outcomes that you're wanting them to do. It's really it's a whole process. It's not just giving a final exam, giving a midterm exam, giving chapter exams or quizzes at the end of each unit. It's really the systematic way of gathering evidence, either indirectly or informally, a more formal exam, all different types of ways that you can gather data, and then interpreting it. So does this result of this assignment show me that students can do the work, or they can't, or have they met the outcomes that I think that I want them to be able to do? So it's not just giving the exams and getting a mark to give on their transcript at the end of the semester. It's the whole process of, are they meeting the outcomes? Are they reaching the outcomes that I want them to do? And then do they have opportunities throughout the semester to show me their skills and things that they've learned? I've then added a slide in of what shouldn't assessment be, and this is where this is if you're kind of focusing more on, I have to give my students a number, I have to give them a grade, I have to give them something on their transcript, because that truly doesn't show, like a 95% doesn't really, it doesn't show exactly what the students have done in the class. We do have to give them a mark, that is true, but at the same time, assessment is the whole process of giving them their grade at the end of the semester, as well as giving them feedback throughout the whole semester of where can they improve, where are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, how can they build on their strengths, how can they improve their weaknesses. So it's not just your mark at the end of the semester, it's the whole process. So it shouldn't be vague. You shouldn't just be assigning marks where students have no idea where the marks are coming from, where does this mark, how is it calculated, they need to know that information. You don't want to stick with just one kind of assessment tool. You wouldn't want to just give midterms and final exams, or you wouldn't want to give just quizzes or just assignments. You want to try to mix it up. We want to do both formative and summative assessments, and we'll talk about that later on. Just give the students lots of opportunities, really build to their strengths, give them lots of different ways that they can show you that they're meeting the objectives of what you want. Or maybe they're not meeting the objectives, and then you use that information to help you figure out how you have to change the instruction of your course. Assessment needs to have that correlation. So if there is no correlation, then there really is an assessment. You want your assessment activities and your outcomes to match. So this will get into the backwards design, which we'll talk about here in the next slide. So it's, what are the activities I want my students to do? Those should be matching what are the outcomes. If I'm expecting my students to describe, explain, define, then that's the kind of assessments I should be giving them. But if my expectations of the students are to create or demonstrate or build, then I should be giving them hands-on activities for the assessment. So make sure that your assessment activities and your outcomes, the verbiage matches. Assessment shouldn't happen just at those key times of midterms and final exams. Your assessment should be happening pretty much every day. But it doesn't always have to be things that you've formally marked. Really, you're just looking for, how can I watch my students to ensure that they are doing what I want them to do? And again, assessment shouldn't focus solely on the student grade. You want to be giving them opportunities for feedback. Either they're assessing their own work, assessing peers, you're assessing them, but just giving them some feedback so that they know if they are meeting those objectives, that they are meeting the standards that you want them to meet throughout the semester. So I am a big fan of backwards design, and there is lots of information about this. There's some great books out there. You can Google it. You can find lots of good websites about it. But I find it just really keeps the connection between what are the outcomes that you want your students to be able to do and how am I going to assess it. So instead of focusing on, oh, I'm going to do all these kinds of activities in class and I'm going to give them all of these different projects, but if you don't tie that into what are the actual outcomes I want the students to do, what are the results, what is the evidence I'm looking for, then there really isn't that correlation. So you start with, so the process, you start with what are the desired results. And we're actually quite fortunate with having a competency profile for all of the classes, that you do have the general areas of competency and the competencies for each one that tell you what the student should be able to do in that course. So it does maintain some consistency between instructor to instructor. You then have some flexibility that you can create your own assessment activities, but ultimately everybody is still teaching towards those same outcomes. No matter who's teaching it, their students are always getting towards that same outcome. So the desired results really are outlined for you. You can get into some of the specific tasks or objectives that might build into those competencies, but for the most part, the competencies are set up for you. Then from there, the next step, step 2, is then designing the assessment method. So how am I going to gather evidence to show that I've met, that the students have met those results? Are they going to be doing hands-on activities? Are they going to be doing projects? Are they going to be doing presentations? Does it match? Is that the verbiage? Is that the way that it's put in the outcomes? Is that what I'm expecting my students to do? So what is it that they need to do? How am I going to make sure they've done it? And then the third step is then, how am I going to teach it? What are the instructional materials? What are the instructional methods? What learning experiences am I going to give them? So really your learning experiences are very closely linked to how you're going to assess it. So instead of figuring out, oh, I'm going to do lectures and I'm going to show them how to do all these things, and at the end I'm just going to throw some multiple choice questions at them. If ultimately the outcomes were for the students to create something or to explain how to put something together or how to build something, then a multiple choice quiz isn't going to show that they've mastered it to that level. So you don't want to leave your assessments till the end. It really is one of the most important things you should be building right up front at the beginning of your course. Then if you're always closely linking your assessments to those outcomes, and again with the college I find we're quite fortunate that we do have, with our involvement of industry, usually the outcomes are very similar to what industry would be expecting of our students coming in as new employees. So you can then build activities that they can take into the real world when they move into their jobs, when they move into their careers. Their activities, they are assessments that really build to more authentic assessment. So that's where the next slide goes to. So authentic assessment is trying to make it as real life as you possibly can. So how are people actually doing this task in the real world? When these students get out into industry, what would be the expectation of industry of them to be able to do this? So It's very hands-on. Usually it's lots of application kinds of questions or activities, constructing, very student structured. You're asking the students to actually do something versus them filling out some multiple choice questions for you to mark. They're designing their assessments, they're designing how they're going to be participating in the activity. It's very direct. You can just see it right there, if they've built it, if they haven't, if they've created it, if they haven't. It's very obvious. You're not having to go and mark and do interpretations. Usually it's very direct. Performing a task kind of goes back to that application in the real life examples. And it's very performance-based, so you're asking your students to do something versus circle the right answer on the multiple choice quiz. That's not really the actual task they would be doing in the workplace. So you want to link it to what's the actual performance that would be expected of them when they're done here. And again, that authentic assessment is if we are looking at, we want them to be able to do what industry is asking, it's tying it back to those outcomes. It's not just asking them to explain in writing how to do something. It's actually showing you as if you were their workplace manager or their boss that they can do the assessment and they can do the objective that you're asking them to do. Okay, so we want to try to keep these things as real and as authentic and kind of applicable as we possibly can. But and we've also talked about that we don't want to leave it just as midterm exams, final exams, kind of those high stakes. We want to always be kind of checking in, monitoring our students. So, but there are places where you do need to have the final exam. You do need the students to show kind of cumulatively what they've learned through the whole semester, or maybe even at the end of every chapter, every quiz, kind of large things that build together. So there is a place for both. They do have value. They are both important for what you need to be able to get that information about your students. But there's two different places for them. So there's formative assessments and there's summative assessments. So you really want to try to have a variety of assessment methods, but at the same time, you don't want to have to mark a ton of things. I know instructors are busy, they don't have a lot of free time, they really don't want to do a lot of formal marking. So formative assessments, what you're trying to do is just monitor your students. You want to give them feedback. It's just trying to build in activities and opportunities within your classes where you can see that they're doing something. It's not just go and answer these questions in your textbook as homework later, or write down some answers to these questions. It's where you're actually giving them opportunities to build things, create things, show you that performance of those objectives. And then you want to be able to use that feedback. So if you see that really they're struggling at something that you thought, oh, I thought they'd be able to get this by now, then you can use that to adjust how you're teaching the materials. So if you need to go back and do more of instruction, if you need to give them more chances, more practice, then really it's also helping you to know how you need to be leading your classes. Are you pacing them appropriately? Are you giving your students enough time? So it just gives both you and the students feedback of how everybody is doing. Then the summative assessments are kind of, so summative would be kind of the whole collection. You're adding up how they're doing on everything. And it's more the actual true evaluation that we would think of things like quizzes, assignments, projects, the things that you're actually marking, the typical marking kinds of things. Usually you have benchmarks, you have standards, you know what kinds of work. You can give your students a rubric, you can tell them how you're going to mark it, and that usually has a much more higher stake or a much more higher point value. But even though the summative assessments are what actually count towards their mark, the formative assessments, and they might not have as high of a point value, they're very useful. They're very valuable. It directs more of your day-to-day operations within the class. So formative assessments are more monitoring of your students, and summative assessments are more the evaluation of your students. So just trying to keep both of those in mind, putting them in where they're appropriate, trying to build your lessons around those can be a really useful thing. Okay. So with formative assessments, really it's that feedback piece. You're using it for feedback for yourself of how you're doing on your lessons. Are your students following along? Are they keeping up? Or are they falling behind? So you can use that, but you also should be giving feedback back to your students so they know how they're doing in the class. They don't want to wait until the final exam and find out that they bombed it and they really should have been getting feedback throughout the entire semester. So there's a variety of ways that you can give feedback. This slide is pretty text heavy. And I guess my kind of intention with this was with the group, I would ask kind of how do you give feedback. These are some main topics of things to think about when you're giving feedback, and then I was going to add as people have some comments. So really with feedback, you should be telling your students why you're assessing them and what that assessment is going to be used for. Is it going to be part of their mark? Is it not going to be part of their mark? Are you using it more for formative versus summative? So you can give feedback right up front, even before they start the assessment. You can give them feedback during it, and then you can give them feedback at the end. If you're giving them comments, make sure that students can understand and use them. So make sure that it's language they would understand, make sure it's constructive feedback so that they can take it and improve from it. You don't want to just say, oh, good job. Why was it a good job? What made it good, and then is there any room for improvement? Where could they have done it? What could they have done to make it an excellent job? So you want to give them some feedback that's useful to these students. Make sure that they know how you're calculating the marks, and really that should be right off of your course outline. You really shouldn't deviate according to how, like if it says assignments are worth 30%, final exam worth 30, and projects worth 40, you would want to stick to that. You can't change what's on your course outline. If you do feel that needs to be changed, you would have to take that to academic council or to your dean and ask for some changes there. And then that also is tied in with the procedures for summarizing and interpreting results should be guided by a written policy. So that's written in the course outline. That really can't be changed. You can't decide partway through the semester to change it. So that is there for your benefit and for the students' benefit, that it keeps it that consistent. Everybody knows right from day one how the mark breakdown is going to be. From there, you could then explain that within projects, some might be worth more than others. Maybe in quizzes, you just average them all together. You should be explaining to your students how you're going to be calculating it. So the feedback can be individual, personalized feedback, or it can be just those general things of how you're calculating the mark. But it really, you should be very upfront and open with your students of how you're calculating their marks. Yeah, so reports should be complete with the strengths and the weaknesses. So really that was kind of what I have mentioned before about how making sure the students can use them, making it a benefit to them. They're probably going to appreciate the work you're putting into feedback if you make it useful for both yourself and for them. And try to build in where students can come and have conferences with you. So perhaps you build in some appointment slots in your calendar where they come at certain points throughout the semester and you guys talk about what's working, what isn't. Do they have feedback that they want to give you about the class? You can give them feedback about their performance. And it probably would be good at key times where it wouldn't be a big surprise, so that they are kind of getting that feedback and having those conferences with you, and so you're able to talk about how they're doing in the class. So with feedback, if you are doing any marking of your assignments and projects and activities, really a rubric or a marking guide is probably one of the easiest ways to give feedback, and it keeps everything consistent. So what a rubric is usually it's shown as a grid, and I might pull up a copy, or there's lots of websites that you can use to help build rubrics if you don't have one of your own. Usually it's as a grid, and along the side are all the different items that you would be marking. So maybe in a presentation you have communication skills, nonverbal skills, communication methods, so just some different things that you might be looking for in a presentation, that they have a PowerPoint, that they speak clearly, all those kinds of things. And then usually across the top it's like 5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 3, 2, 1. And then you give exemplars or examples of what would be 5 versus what would be a 1. So right up front, and you would give that to your students before they do the assignment, so that then they know, okay, if I want to get a 5 out of 5, this is what I have to do. If I am okay with a 2 out of 5, then this is the activity, this is the level of work that I'm going to do. So it just gives your students the opportunity to see right up front. You're being open with them, you're being consistent with everybody. This is what you do for a full mark, and then this is how it would go down from there. So then this slide just kind of has some tips of what you can do with rubrics if you're creating your own, just some things that you want to keep in mind. So the first point is just saying that the number of characteristics, you want things small enough and concrete so that you can accurately assess each one. The second point is saying that you should be creating the rubric before you actually mark it. You don't want to be making up the rubric as you're marking the assignments. It should be done before you even see any of the students' work. And so you might want to keep in mind kind of where are you at in the semester? Is this an assignment they've been doing, that they're doing very first day, or is it an assignment in the last week of the semester? So from there, you should keep that in mind when you're building your rubric. So your expectations of a 5 out of 5 at the beginning of the semester is probably very different of what it would be at the end of the semester. So you want to just remember that your students might be at a variety of places at different points in the semester. Before the assessment method is used, students should be told how this information is going to be judged or scored. So really just giving them access to the rubric. So you can do your rubrics on paper, you can do them as a Google form, you can actually build them within Moodle as well. There is a rubric option within assignments and projects. So there's lots of different ways you can share that with your students, but really up front you should be telling them that the different weighting, maybe in a presentation, the presentation skills are really what you're marking them on, and the content it's not as important, or maybe it's the other way around. So make sure they know kind of where the weightings are, what are the important things, what are you really looking for, what are your expectations of them. So make sure that's up front. If you do change anything throughout, if you decide, oh, this rubric isn't really done right, I missed something, if you do make any changes, the next point is saying that you should then go back and rescore everybody's. So don't change a rubric partway through and mark half the students' work with the original and then the rest of the students' work with the changed rubric. You should go back and make sure it's still consistent and that the changed rubric is applied to everybody. Make sure if you are doing any sort of interpretation, if it's your opinion, make sure that you have carefully described and justified what qualifies as a 5 out of 5 versus a 1 out of 5. So if you're very upfront and have that laid out before you give the students the work, before you give them the assignment, and then when you hand back their feedback, if you have it all laid out right from the beginning, there shouldn't be as much room for argument. They shouldn't be able to come back and argue that they should have deserved a higher mark, or you think they deserved a lower mark. It's very clear, and that you just want to be consistent. So perhaps with using a rubric or a marking guide, maybe ask the students not to put their names on their assignments, maybe just use student ID numbers, maybe take off the cover page that has their name on it so that you're not seeing whose is whose. So just trying to be as consistent and as fair and as even with everyone as you possibly can. Okay, so that's the majority of the topics that we were going to discuss in the session. I hope it just kind of gives you some questions of things to think about. I really didn't want to come up here and just say, this is how you write good test questions. This is the kinds of assignments you should be creating. I really wanted to make it kind of leave you with some questions, some things to think about, because everyone's classes are different, everyone has different kinds of students, and really the assessments you build from one year and you teach the same class might be completely different because of the kinds of students you have coming in. So really you want to kind of keep in mind what's the environment, who are the students, who's the audience, what is the best way for this group of students to show me that they can reach these objectives. You don't always want to have those, and it is handy to have them, but having a canned quiz that you can just hand out to everybody, those do have their place, but at the same time you wouldn't want to always be basing your marks on those. You want to give different groups of students different opportunities and different ways to show you that they can get to those objectives and outcomes at the end of the course. Okay, so all these questions that I have posted and used in this PowerPoint, I have used I kind of used it as my guide when I was building the ETC resource site. So I have found links that have attempted to answer some of these questions. So if you are looking for some specifics of how do I write good multiple choice questions, if that is the best way to evaluate that objective, I found some really good sites that explain how to write good test questions, and they are linked in the ETC site. So feel free to have a look around, see what's in there. And again, I've also talked about some of these things like how do I build a rubric? I've found some great sites that help you build rubrics. There's some different kind of unique ways of building some assessments. I found some great sites and blogs that talked about doing contract assessments. Perhaps you want to let your students kind of, you contract with them. What is the work that qualifies for an A? What is the work that qualifies for a B? What is the work that qualifies for a C? Then students can decide, well, I'm okay with getting a B, so I'm just going to do this much work. You know, other students might want to get an A, so then they do all the work that counts towards the A mark. So there's lots of good sites on there. Maybe that's an option if you really want to make it student-centered and let the students decide what they have the time to do and what marks are they okay with reaching. That's all in that ETC resource site as well. So let me just see if I can bring this up. Just see if I can. Just going to share my screen here. There we go. So this is the ETC site. So it just has some objectives of what really I wanted this site to do. And then I've built in some links. So what is necessary for great teaching and learning? And we've been trying to really connect this back. Chinook's Edge has done some great work on kind of the requirements of great teaching. And they have this model called the quality learning environment. And so I'm trying to use that whenever I build these professional development activities here at the college, using that from Chinook's Edge. Because we do really want to try to build on what they have, what they've been offering for their teaching staff, and use that here as well. And then I've kind of broken this into two parts. So there is the importance of feedback and assessments appropriate to your course and to what's in your course profile. So just some general things of like, why is assessment important? How do I plan? How do I give feedback? Rubrics? How do I use contract grading? And then the second page is looking at how do I actually build these things. So how do I create some of it? Summative assessments actually goes into how to build great, effective test questions. So it's there. I know that it is a big part of teaching materials that you do give multiple choice and true and false, and we're never going to get away from those. Those will always be, they'll always have their place. They do have their value, but there is some kind of do's and don'ts of building good test questions and building good tests, and I've just collected some good resources there for you. Okay, so that covers, let me just pull back up. That covers everything that I wanted to talk about today. Please feel free, really this was just kind of an introduction just to give you some ideas, some questions to think about. If you are looking for a little bit more help, definitely we can help you out in the ETC department if you do have some questions. If you do want some feedback maybe on the kinds of assessments that you're building, if you'd like to run some past us, we can definitely give you some ideas and some feedback. And really just talking with other peers in your department can also be a really useful place. So I thank you for joining us in this session today, and hopefully you got some good ideas and tips and tricks. And yeah, again, I thank you for taking the time to watch this.